Hello, everybody. I'm so glad to be with you. I'm delighted to be invited by your president to contribute to your special international conference on nutrition and lifestyle medicine and to focus on reversing coronary heart disease and extending longevity. Among many thoughtful questions raised about a diet and heart disease relationship, two key questions have emerged. Number one, are fork and knife complicit in the cause and cure of circulation-related modern killer diseases? And number two, is there a diet and lifestyle that could add life to your years and years to your life? We're beginning to understand more and more that most chronic diseases cannot be cured with pills and procedures. This is one of the main reasons why we have seen the emergence and explosive growth of the lifestyle medicine movement, the fastest growing medical specialty in North America, and now found in 42 countries in the world. Why the emergence and energetic expansion of lifestyle medicine? Because today's epidemic of modern killer diseases, such as heart disease and stroke, hypertension and arthritis, and overweight and diabetes, cannot be lessened, assuaged, and mitigated through pills and procedures. The best modern medicine can do is improve the quality of life by managing symptoms. But cures for these chronic diseases are rare and elusive. Well, take coronary heart disease. You get your medications, you get your procedures such as bypass surgery and stents, and yet the underlying disease process continues. Regardless of all those medical treatments, you're going to die with heart disease because we have not found a medical cure for its underlying pathology. Or take diabetes. You had pre-diabetes for 5 years, but you didn't know about it. It developed into full-fledged type 2 diabetes, and eventually you got the diagnosis of the ill. And it was then matched with a pill. But before too long, the dose had to be increased. More medications had to be added, ending with insulin injections. Did these medications stop the diabetes? Did these medications protect you from the cardiovascular complications of diabetes, like blindness, amputations of toes and legs, or renal deterioration, stroke and heart disease, and impotence in men? Despite more pharmaceutical interventions, diabetes today continues unabatedly because we have no medical cure for diabetes. On the other hand, the scientific evidence points out that our modern killer diseases, such as heart disease and diabetes, can be successfully treated, reversed, and cured. And how would you do that? How would you cure heart disease or hypertension or diabetes? How would you cure arthritis? Check the board-certified medical specialty of lifestyle medicine. They'll tell you you have a great chance to do it with an enlightened, health-promoting lifestyle. You do it with intelligent self-care. This prominently involves a simple, more traditional diet of foods as grown. It involves also consistent progressive exercise and sufficient rest and sleep, avoidance of alcohol and tobacco, and becoming a kinder and nicer person. These are the pillars of lifestyle medicine, health-promoting habits that will activate the body's innate ability to begin to heal itself. Well, let's briefly review the role of fork and knife as weapons of mass destruction in the etiology of common chronic diseases. Did you know that most of our modern killer diseases were difficult to find some 100 years ago in the United States? Look at Dr. William Osler's book published in 1928. He reported that heart disease was so rare that one was lucky to find one heart attack a year in a hospital in an average-sized town. But look at the change. Today, we register some 3,000 heart attacks a day, with cardiovascular disease in America now being responsible for 30% of all deaths, with the percentage of cardiovascular deaths also having steadily increased over the last 30 to 50 years around the world. Look at the change in the width of our chairs in America. From 1900 to 1970, over a period of 70 years, the width of the average chair hardly changed from 43 to 45 centimeters. But then suddenly we're now at 61 centimeters. America has emerged larger than ever, so that now 74% of the adult population is either overweight or obese. And with obesity, you must be concerned about diabetes, which has increased by 300% within 30 years, doubling every 10 years. And with obesity, you must also be concerned about high blood pressure, heart disease, arthritis, asthma, sleep apnea, and certain adult cancers, which are all promoted and fueled by excessive weight. Look at the increase in the incidence of breast cancer. In 1960, 1 in 20 women would develop breast cancer in a lifetime. That has now increased to 1 in 7 women, a 300% increase within 50 years. The question then is, with all the advances in medical technology, in diagnostics and in emergency care, and advances in dealing with episodic diseases, such as most infectious diseases, why do we have such an unprecedented increase in these chronic diseases, especially during the last 50 years? Could it be related to the dramatic changes in the American food supply, where palate titillating taste sensations have become the envy around the world? Look at the changes in the macronutrients, where fats and refined carbohydrates and animal protein have substantially increased. Take a look. Along with the increase in the national gross domestic products, the income of a society, the diet composition of a society begins to change. Potatoes turn into potato chips. Corn turns into corn chips. Beans turn into burgers, and oats become Oreos. Whole grains then become refined flour for pizzas, donuts, cookies, and cakes. And water is replaced by Coca-Cola and other soda drinks. And to enhance their flavor and the level of addictiveness, common and traditional foods have become adulterated with excessive amounts of salt, sugar, and fat, and affecting the pleasure centers of the brain. The outcome has been the globalization of the American diet composition that you see on the right-hand side of the graph, mostly consisting of fats, the red and pink colors, and sugar, the yellow color. At the same time, over time, you see a significant increase in protein, that's the blue color, mostly from animal sources, and a decline in whole food starch, that's the green color, which has dwindled precipitously and has been largely replaced with refined white flour starch. And to unpack this major change in the American diet composition, we need to look at 2 major dietary shifts. Beginning with the 1970s, whole foods became industrialized products, stripping them of their nutrients and fiber while increasing their caloric density. We shifted from slow foods to fast foods, and from eating at home to eating out. A new industry came into full bloom, devoted to the refining, processing, and engineering of new foods. This created new flavors and titillating tastes. And backed by creative marketing efforts, all this dramatically increased the number of empty calories. Now, empty meaning with little nutritional value. These empty calories, largely coming from sugar and refined oils and fat, now account in America for at least 44% of all the calories eaten. Empty calories, overfed and undernourished. But don't overlook a second dietary shift, and that has been the increase in meat consumption, especially in processed meats, from a total of 56 to 91 kilograms per person per year over a period of 100 years. But also look at the increase in the consumption of cheese, an addictive engineered food, very high in fat and salt. Now, with saturated fat prominently related to blood cholesterol levels and thus to heart disease, cheese, with its high saturated fat content, makes a major contribution to the development of atherosclerosis and circulatory diseases. Cheese, be careful. This then is the American diet that everybody wants and clamors for. It's a diet where 55% of the calories come from refined processed foods and 31% comes from dairy and animal foods. And here is the point I want to make. Only 14% of the calories that we eat in America today, only 14% of the calories eaten come from fruits, vegetables, whole grains, not white flour, legumes like beans and lentils, and some nuts. These are traditional foods as they come to us in nature. Let me emphasize my point once more. Only 14% of the calories we consume today come from foods as grown, from traditional foods as they come to us in nature. And what is the impact of these dietary changes taking place around the world? Here's Dr. Walter Willett from Harvard University. He said, epidemiologists, people who study the epidemic of these diseases, have long known that the major determinants of our killer diseases are dietary and lifestyle factors, end of quote. In convincing population studies, epidemiologists have demonstrated that when countries shift from their traditional diet to this rich Western diet, they will see the emergence of Western diseases within 5 to 10 years. And it's this observation in many countries that has given rise to the concept that Western diets precede Western diseases. Isn't this what has been happening in China, especially affecting the urbanized populations? So let's focus on the heart and the coronary artery sitting on top of the heart muscle, and then look at the inside of these coronary arteries. Here you see the coronary arteries in cross section. At birth, there are no encumbrances on the inside of the artery, no atherosclerotic plaque, no buildup of cholesterol, fats, and calcium that could narrow the arterial lumen of the coronary arteries. But after 40 years on the standard American diet, we can expect some 50 to 60% narrowing of these coronary arteries. Even so, these blood flow restricting processes are asymptomatic until there's at least some 70% narrowing. You will never know that you have heart disease because it is asymptomatic until you have about at least 70% narrowing. That's why all too often, for some 40% of the people, the first sign of heart disease is sudden death. However, the underlying pathology called atherosclerosis is not only affecting the coronary arteries, atherosclerosis is systemic. It affects all major arteries from the top of the head all the way down to the feet. There are many diseases in many different locations with many different names treated by many different specialists, but there's only one major underlying pathology, and that is atherosclerosis, which then expresses itself as myocardial infarction or angina pectoris when affecting the coronary arteries, or as stroke, senility, memory loss, hearing loss, visual loss when affecting the arteries of the brain. All of these are circulation-related illnesses. They are vascular diseases, including hypertension prominently related to the renal arteries, as well as gangrene, intermittent claudication, and degenerative disc disease. But then you also must be concerned about erectile dysfunction or impotence. Considering the relatively small diameter of the penile arteries, they can easily get narrowed down with atherosclerotic plaques, obviously compromising a sustained optimal blood flow. Thus, erectile dysfunction or impotence can become one of the earliest presentations of vascular disease. It becomes a harbinger, a forerunner, an early announcer of an emerging generalized atherosclerotic presence. Are there any antecedents or predictors for these circulatory diseases? What drives this underlying disease process called atherosclerosis and its inflammatory aspects? Are there any risk factors? Well, take a closer look at this risk arch. The higher the risk factor is located on this risk arch, the more powerful it is in driving this disease. And so the number one risk factor is cholesterol, then high blood pressure and smoking. And then you look at diabetes, obesity, and high triglycerides. And of course, inactivity, stress, and perhaps some genetics, although epigenetics can overrule this, as we have learned. These risk factors, these determinants of atherosclerosis and vascular diseases are related to 3 F's. The first F is the fork, the diet, as designated here by those yellow stars, prominently related to 5 of the 8 risk factors. The second F is for fingers, that's smoking. And the third F is for feet, or exercise. 3 F's. They're largely under our control. We control them. 3 F's. They're largely under our control. Well, who then largely determines our future? We do. It's our habits. The question then is, what habits do we foster? What habits do we nurture? What habits do we support? Prominent long-term health studies carried out at Harvard University suggest that 70% of stroke is preventable, 71% of cancer, 82% of heart disease, and 91% of type 2 diabetes, totally preventable if we could make some lifestyle changes. And experts estimate that some 80% of these modern killer diseases could be prevented by making significant changes in diet and exercise. Now, we discussed fork and knife as weapons of mass destruction. What would happen, however, if we use fork and knife differently? Could we possibly discover them as instruments of hope, health, and healing in arresting and reversing our lifestyle-related chronic diseases? Let's look at what happened to President Clinton. In 2004, at the age of 58, the president underwent quadruple coronary bypass surgery because of chest pains. 6 years later, in 2010, with recurring chest pains, he underwent a double stenting to keep the restenosing arteries open.
I was lucky I didn't die of a heart attack.
Former President Clinton, like too many people, was busy. And for years, he ignored warning signs from his heart. But in 2004, during an exhausting book tour, there was something different.
I had a real tightness in my chest when I was getting off the airplane, and it was the only time I'd had it unrelated to exercise.
We're here outside New York Presbyterian Hospital. In just a couple of hours, President Bill Clinton, former president, is scheduled to undergo surgery.
So I immediately went down to our local hospital, and they did a test. They said, "You got real problems." They hustled me down to Columbia Presbyterian, and they confirmed the determination that I had serious blockage and needed the surgeries.
The doctors immediately knew options were limited. The 58-year-old Clinton needed to have his chest opened, his heart stopped, and surgery performed.
There's no medical treatment for reversing obstructions that have already formed in his blood vessels.
I got Hillary and Chelsea there, and all I remember is it was happening fast. And everybody who cared about me was scared, and I felt rather serene. I thought, gosh, we dodged the bullet. I didn't have a heart attack.
On Labor Day in 2004, Mr. Clinton had 4 blood vessels bypassed.
Starting this morning around 8 o'clock, he had a relatively routine quadruple bypass operation. We left the operating room around noon, and he is recovering normally at this point. So I think right now everything looks straightforward.
Another life saved. Really? Do we have a cure for heart disease? Will bypass surgery be the answer, the cure for President Clinton? Yeah, 6 years later, he is readmitted to the hospital with recurring chest pain. With his reputation of being a big lover of fast foods and now being in the hospital again, his cardiologist at New York Presbyterian Hospital wanted to protect the president from being seen as the victim of his own dietary lifestyle. And so he made the statement that this hospitalization was not the result of his lifestyle or his diet. No. What we must remember is that heart disease is a chronic condition, he said. We don't have a cure for this condition, but we have excellent treatments. Well, let's take a look at these medical treatments. Medical technology provides indeed many successful outcomes for acute and episodic diseases that come and go. We are unexcelled in diagnostics and in emergency care. And for heart disease, we have many treatments, but cures are rare and very elusive. Take bypass surgery. This year in America, we will do some 400,000 of these major surgeries. And yet, within 12 to 18 months, about 40% of these grafted vessels are no longer functioning. We're talking about a 38 to 46% graft failure. The graft has become affected by atherosclerotic plaques because apparently very few, if anyone, has told these patients, look, you have been given a second chance. And now you must really take advantage of that. If you want to keep these grafted vessels open and prevent the other arteries from clogging up, then you must stop smoking. You must get into a daily exercise program. And you must become committed to follow a more traditional diet that's whole food, plant-based. So limit your cholesterol and your fat intake. It is critically important. In a major Newsweek magazine article, the authors made the argument that probably 80% of these bypass surgeries could be avoided, could be replaced, could be taken care of in a different way through a lifestyle medicine approach. They referred to the research studies of doctors Ornish and Esselstyn, who had reversed and scientifically documented that these atherosclerotic plaques in the arteries did indeed begin to melt down. They regressed, and often within less than a year. Well, amazing, isn't it? But what about statin drugs? They may be helpful in secondary prevention of heart disease, but disappointingly ineffective in primary prevention. Large studies have shown that these drugs lower the cholesterol by some 30%, but this pharmaceutical cholesterol lowering did not protect the heart or extend the life expectancy of a patient in this high-risk primary prevention setting. And here is the editorial in the Journal of the American Medical Association by the editor. She wrote, "We have underestimated the risk of statin drugs, approaching 20% of patients at risk for muscle aches and pains and at risk for developing diabetes and memory loss." And then she continued, "If we give 100 men who never had a heart attack before, if we give these 100 men these statin drugs for 5 years, we might expect to prevent how many? 1 to 2 heart attacks." Imagine you take 100 men at risk for heart attack and you give them these statin drugs to lower their cholesterol by 30% for 5 years, and what you might get is a likely benefit of preventing 1 or at the most 2 heart attacks in 5 years of using these medications. And then she asked the rhetorical question, well, what shall we do? And she answered, a healthy lifestyle, a simple diet, and daily exercise. On the other hand, the pharmaceutical mantra for every ill, there's a pill may have been successfully used with many infectious diseases. I mean, we can stop a urinary tract infection in 10 days with antibiotics. We can do the same thing with bronchitis. 10 days and the bacterial infection is gone. And so when it comes to chronic diseases, however, people have similar expectations. But most chronic diseases are not caused by some bacterial pathogen that an antibiotic drug can knock out within a couple of weeks. No, our modern killer diseases are largely diet and lifestyle related. They relate largely to our habits. Have we perhaps oversold the idea that for every ill, there's a pill? Look at the data from the American Centers for Disease Control. It shows that prescription drugs were responsible for 246,000 fatal adverse drug reactions. This makes prescription drugs the number 3 cause of death in America, responsible for 11% of all American deaths. So take a look at this picture. What do you see? Well, you see people in green uniforms, and they're all having mops in their hands. I see water on the floor, lots of it. And they're trying to keep the floor dry. They are so devoted to their task that they may even forget to make time for their families or to play golf. They are just devoted to only one thing in their professional life, to keep the floor dry. They're even passing out umbrellas to keep people that are there to keep them dry. But take a closer look. What's the problem? What's the real problem? What's wrong with this picture? Well, would it not be smart to look for the cause of the flooding, namely the leaking pipes? What we need here then is not more mops. What we need here is not more doctors, more nurses who take care of the symptoms, the water on the floor. No, what we need here is a plumber who takes care of the cause of the flooding. Now, of America's national medical budget, 86% is spent on managing the symptoms of chronic disease. We are not curing these diseases. We are merely managing their symptoms to improve the quality of life. But cures are rare and elusive. Instead of pouring most of our efforts into symptomatic relief, should we not take the offensive in tackling the causes of these modern killer diseases, our cultural lifestyle patterns, our habits, and our health eroding practices? These are the causes that cannot be cured by some mechanical device or by some magic pill. Look at this chart more closely. In 1960, we spent 5% of our income as a society on medical care. As you move to the very right-hand side, you see that in 2020, we spent some 20% of our income on medical care, from 5% to 20% of our income. And yet, during those last 60 years, our chronic diseases have not become less. Instead, they have markedly increased because our culture and our personal choices are promoting a lifestyle that is aversive to health. It undermines health. But can you really reverse these diseases? The first major indication occurred during World War II. In 1940, Nazi armies invaded Norway, occupied the country, took all the livestock to feed their soldiers, and the Norwegian people had to settle for a simple food, simple diet of mostly homegrown foods. What was the result? With all the fears and worries and anxieties, with all the stress of the war, one would expect an increase in heart disease, right? Not so. Restricted in their diet to simple, mostly homegrown foods, the coronary death rate rapidly dropped. But look what happened after the war was over in 1945. People returned to their pre-war diet, and the diseases came roaring back. In 1990, a young cardiologist by the name of Dr. Dean Ornish published a report in the Lancet Medical Journal that shook up the medical establishment. Dr. Ornish spent 1 year studying 48 men with advanced heart disease. Many of them were candidates for coronary bypass surgery. And here's what he did. He randomly assigned the men to two groups. Both groups were asked to quit smoking and to walk daily. In addition, the first group practiced stress management and followed a strict plant-based whole food diet with only 7% of the calories coming from fat and with virtually no cholesterol. The second group was given the standard American Heart Association's prudent diet for heart disease. This diet allowed 30% of calories as fat and up to 300 milligrams of cholesterol a day. At the end of the year, when the results were presented at the scientific session of the American Heart Association in Washington, D.C., they became front page news all over America. Dr. Ornish reported that those on the very low-fat, plant-based whole food diet, number one, dropped their cholesterols by 24% in the absence of any medication. Number two, their repeat PET scans of the coronary arteries taken at the end of the 1 year study demonstrated very clearly regression of atherosclerotic plaque in 82%. And number three, the older men with the most advanced disease had the best results. Surprise. Dr. Ornish was able to present scientific evidence that narrowed plaque-filled arteries had widened, allowing more blood and oxygen to nourish the heart muscle. The atherosclerotic plaques had begun to melt down, and the regression process was underway. Now, the group on the so-called prudent diet, however, the second group, had a mere 5% drop in cholesterol, and 53% of their coronary arteries actually showed a progression in their plaque buildup. It got worse. At a press conference, Dr. Ornish then concluded, the moderate diet recommendations of the American Heart Association do not go far enough to effectively influence the progression of coronary artery disease. People with clinically demonstrated disease need to go beyond the present dietary moderate recommendations. Here's a statement to summarize Dr. Ornish's work with heart disease. Dr. Ornish has scientifically proven that people can open their blocked arteries without drugs or surgery. He guides them through a rigorous lifestyle program. Here, the key issue is a very simple plant-based diet with a focus on whole, unprocessed foods, foods as grown, traditional foods. Another physician who advanced the concepts of diet-related reversal of heart disease was Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. He was a well-known thyroid surgeon at the famous Cleveland Clinic. In the 1980s, he changed his emphasis in his practice and became involved in educating patients of how to reverse coronary artery disease. Single-handedly, he used a very strict whole food plant-based diet to help serious coronary patients who had been described as the walking dead. Before joining his dietary study in 1985, 18 coronary patients in the previous 8 years were under excellent cardiological care at the famous Cleveland Clinic, suffered 49 cardiovascular events, while at the same time sustaining an average cholesterol of 6.0 millimoles per liter. So these 18 coronary patients were being seen at the famous Cleveland Clinic. Nevertheless, in 8 years, had suffered 49 cardiovascular events. Then they came to Dr. Esselstyn and they said, look, we don't know what to do. We have seen the finest cardiologists. We had all the surgeries. We had all the medications. There's nothing your surgical colleagues can do for us anymore. Can you help us with your dietary program? Well, subsequently, Dr. Esselstyn enrolled these 18 patients into his lifestyle medicine program. And over the next 5 years, the cholesterol levels dropped from 6.0 to 3.5. During that time, being now 5 years older, these patients should have had more heart disease, more clinical events, but instead they had none of these events. And then after another 7 years following the program, now totaling 12 years altogether, the cholesterol was still averaging only 3.6 and still 0 cardiovascular events. Think about this. 8 years under the treatment of some of the best cardiologists in the world with the best of medical care, nevertheless, 49 cardiovascular events in these 18 patients. And then these patients now 12 years older, when they should have had more, many, many more cardiovascular events, they experienced none, 0, 0, 0. The way you live is the way you die, isn't it? And here is some of the angiographic documentation of the change. The one on the left side shows the left anterior descending coronary artery. The circle there shows a severe narrowing of the artery, permitting only little blood flow, the obvious cause of angina upon exertion. On the angiogram on the right-hand side, now 2.5 years later, the same artery, the same area, x-rayed, and you see a fully functioning coronary artery with restored optimal blood flow and no more angina. Amazing. So when angina patients follow a strict program using a very low-fat, plant-based traditional diet, angina pain usually diminishes within weeks, in that such a diet decreases blood viscosity. This change in the blood viscosity then facilitates greater blood flow and better myocardial oxygenation. Dr. Esselstyn's 20-year follow-up program on his 18 patients has been published in his book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. Now, we have known now for years that much of today's coronary heart disease can be prevented. But it's exciting to realize that under the proper condition, it is now possible to also reverse and cure heart disease. These revolutionary studies suggest that given the proper diet, we may be able to eat ourselves out of heart disease. Are you ready to take another look at President Clinton after his heart surgeries? Let's take a look.
How did you lose so much weight? What kind of diet are you on?
Well, the short answer is I went on essentially a plant-based diet. I live on beans, legumes, vegetables, fruit, no dairy, and it changed my whole metabolism, and I lost 24 pounds, and I got back to basically what I weighed in high school. But I did it for a different reason. I mean, I wanted to lose a little weight, but I didn't dream this would happen. I did it because after I had this stent put in, I realized that even though it happens quite often that after you have bypasses, you lose the veins because they're thinner and weaker than arteries. The truth is that it clogged up, which means that the cholesterol was still causing buildup in my vein that was part of my bypass. And thank God I could take the stents. I don't want it to happen again. So I did all this research and I saw that 82% of the people since 1986 who have gone on a plant-based, no dairy, no meat of any kind, no chicken, turkey. If you can do it, 82% of the people who've done that have begun to heal themselves. Their arterial blockage cleans up. The calcium deposit around their heart breaks up. This movement has been led by a doctor named Caldwell Esselstyn at the Cleveland Clinic, Dean Ornish in Minoa in California, the doctors Campbell, father and son, who wrote the China study, and a handful of others. But we now have 25 years of evidence. And so I thought, well, since I need to lose a little weight for Chelsea's wedding, I'll become part of this experiment. I'll see if I can be one of those that can have a self-clearing mechanism. We'll see.
I hope you're healthy for many years, and and get to see grandchildren for many years
Me
to
too.
come.
That's really the big deal. You know, Hillary and I, we're happy. We love our son-in-law and we admire him, but we'd like to be around. If there's grandkids, we want to be there to do our part.
President, good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks for what you're doing.
Thanks.
And look what happened. The former president with a new lifestyle where food becomes the new medicine. This is the new entertainment style of Bill Clinton since he saw the film Forks Over Knives, which means that when it comes to heart disease, the dietary fork may be more important than the surgeon's knife. Have you heard the saying that the best way to predict your longevity is to be smart in picking long-living parents? You know, the idea we used to have was that genes determined how long we live. Not so. Here's what Harvard researchers found who looked at the life expectancy data collected from some 120,000 nurses and physicians whom they followed for over 30 years. Here's what they found. They estimate that women who practiced 5 simple health habits would expect to live an extra 14 years beyond their life expectancy, while men would live an extra 12 years. The question is, what were these 5 health habits that would give you an extra 12 to 14 years? Well, here they are. Number 1, eating a healthy diet, they found. Number 2, exercising regularly. Number 3, keeping a healthy body weight. Don't be overweight. And number 4, low or no cholesterol. And number 5, no smoking. And what a joy for me to see lives turning around with more than 110,000 graduates from our 30-hour video-delivered complete health improvement program, CHIP for short, and with more than 50 articles published in peer-reviewed medical journals. Here are some dietary recommendations for your consideration. I mean, really, we need a new cow. Low in calories, no cholesterol, no saturated fat, and high in nutrients and high in fiber. This is what it looks like in actual numbers. The contrast between the standard American diet and the more optimal diet is obvious. You want to decisively reduce your fats and oils from about 100 grams on the average to no more than 40 grams. And your cholesterol from 400 milligrams to less than 50 milligrams. Of course, if you are choosing to be a total vegetarian, then your cholesterol intake will always automatically be 0. Now, when it comes to the consumption of added sugar, cut back from the average 35 teaspoons to less than 10 teaspoons a day. And cut your daily salt intake of 10 grams at least in half. And what about fiber? With all those refined and engineered foods, most Americans only get about 10 grams of fiber. A more traditional Chinese diet, however, may contain 40 to 60 grams of fiber. With that, a lot of constipation would disappear almost overnight, and our immune system would be much stronger. Now, when it comes to water, well, drink more. So a more optimal diet then would focus on a wide variety of plant-based whole foods. These foods are low in calories but high in nutrients, and they're best eaten without all the added fats and oils, sugars, and salt. It's a diet that is respectful of traditional Chinese foods that keeps refined, processed, and engineered foods at a minimum. And if you insist on eating animal products, it's best to use them only as a seasoning or as a condiment in small amounts rather than as a main part of a dish. Now, for some of you who may have already left behind your traditional Chinese diet, it may be almost too hard to make that big jump all at once to return to your more traditional diet. Well, I understand. I do. On this red and green graph, you have on your left side the typical American diet: meat, dairy, eggs, processed foods, alcohol, and caffeine. At the same time, you also have listed here At the top, the worst health outcome and the shortest health span and the shortest lifespan. These are the American diseases, the chronic diseases. But then, as you move towards the right hand of the graph, towards the full green triangle, you begin to eat less and less of the foods in the red triangle, and you begin to eat more and more foods in the green triangle, where the emphasis is on a more traditional Chinese diet with plenty of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, lots of beans and tofu, and some nuts and seeds, and plenty of water. And when you look at the top on the right-hand side, that's where you will also have the best health outcome and the longest health span and the best longevity, especially as you couple this with daily exercise and stress management and the avoidance of risky substances like tobacco and alcohol. Here's Dr. Dean Ornish. He wrote, "What's good for you and your health is also good for our planet, and it's good for the animals. Although heart disease and diabetes will kill more people each year worldwide than all other diseases combined, these diseases are completely preventable and even reversible for at least 90% of the people today if they change their diet and lifestyle." So we have a choice. Moving towards a plant-based whole food diet seems to me a very responsible and enlightened choice on a planet that is fighting for its survival. Fork and knife, they're either weapons of mass destruction or they can be instruments of a healthier, happier, and longer life.
What will your last 10 years look like? Will you be quick enough for a game of tag with your grandchild? Strong enough to embrace every moment? Will you grow old with vitality? Or get old with disease? It's time to decide. The average Canadian will spend their last 10 years in sickness. Change your future.
What are you putting at the end of your fork? So blessings on you, good health, and a long life.